So good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Walsh. I'm the city administrator for the city of St. Helens and also a City League of Oregon Cities board member. My pleasure to be here hosting our guests. Welcome to this afternoon's breakout session, How to Make Sure Park and Rec Doesn't Become What the Heck, Best Practices in Good Council and Staff Relationships. And looks like an exciting conference or after lunch session. I'd like to introduce today's speakers, Jake Spano of St. Louis Park, Minnesota, and Tom Harmoning, former city manager of St. Louis Park, Minnesota. Mayor Spano has served on the City of St. Louis Park City Council since 2012 as both a council member and a mayor. He is a trusted political resource and a local and statewide level through building collaborative spaces for his colleagues and having worked on U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar's first United States Senate race, where he was the campaign's political director in Greater Minnesota. Tom Harmoning is a retired city manager. He served on the St. Louis City Park manager in that position for 17 years, where he led 2 successful community visioning initiatives, redeveloped manor areas of the city, and renovated a variety of city facilities. In 2014, he was recognized for his leadership and dedication by the League of Oregon Minnesota Cities. Not Oregon. It's hard not to say Oregon. So, please join me in welcoming Mayor Spano and Mr. Harmoning.
All right, Brad, am I on? First off, I want to thank Brad in the back. Brad did a great job helping myself and the mayor with our technology. You were great, so much appreciated, Brad. A couple of other housekeeping things. Just to clarify once again, this presentation is not about Parks and Rec, all right? We were at lunch today or breakfast, I can't remember, and somebody said, oh yeah, you're going to be talking about Parks and Rec. Well, we're really not. It's really more of a metaphor for how a topic, let's say about Parks and Rec, maybe it's a contentious Parks and Rec issue, can grow to what the heck is going on. Now I would point out, I had suggested about 10 different titles for this session. The mayor came up with one, and that's the one we're using. So just want to make that clear.
I used to be in marketing, so you know, you don't sell the steak, you sell the sizzle.
That's right. So before we get going, and before I talk a little bit more about the presentation, I'd just like to know, Jake and I would like to know, who's in the room. So if you are a mayor or elected official, a council member, would you please raise your hand? Oh, wow. Okay. And staff, city managers, CEOs, actually fairly evenly split.
It's going to be a fair fight.
Yeah. So
I like the elected folks' chances, though.
The approach today is going to be participatory. You're going to see a short video here in just a minute, and then Jake is going to ask a few questions of all of you, and then we're going to jump into a fairly quick presentation on this particular topic and how councils and staff can develop systems and methods on, to ensure that there's a that you're performing in a high performing way. So more to come on that. At the end, we're hoping that you walk away understanding the importance of what we think is critical, and that is the culture on the council, the culture of the organization, and the culture in the community, and that you can come away with maybe a tool or an idea that you can use in your own organization as you continue your role as an elected or appointed official. The underlying purpose of all of this is the purpose of local government is to serve the community, and the idea is a council, along with staff, should operate in a way that provides the best form of government for its community. And a dysfunctional council leads to a dysfunctional staff and doesn't serve in the best interest of the community. So we're here to talk about that today. And I'll start the video.
All right, and just one other little piece. So my name's pronounced Spano, just for folks. So got a long vowel. My Twitter handle is @SpanoJake. I know some people like to tweet about things when they're happening, so if you choose to, by all means, feel free. But yeah, we wanted to just start with a little video. And believe it or not, finding a good video for this moment and this topic was a little harder than I thought it was going to be. But we found just like a 1.5 to 2 minute video. So.
And just one thing, another thing, Mayor, from a participatory perspective, we're going to try to keep our remarks to 30 minutes so that you have time to ask questions of us.
Yep.
So, here we go. Brad, I'm hoping.
Well, I want to get back to the civility thing again, kind of go off what Tim said, and it's kind of interesting, one of these code of conducts that I found, and it talks about, at times the impacts of the entire community must be weighed against the impact of only a few. Despite these pressures, elected officials are called upon to exhibit appropriate behavior at all times. Demonstrating respect for each individual through words and actions is the touchstone that can help guide council members to do the right thing, even in the most difficult situations. So I find it a little bit ironic, Mr. Kelly, talking about people coming up from other cities when I recall a woman coming up from Houston after everyone was talking about how great National Night Out was, and I made a comment saying, thank you for coming to our city, but we'll take it from here. And you went straight home on social media and disparaged me about that statement.
How did I disparage you?
People on our own council saying GTFO, which is not what I said.
Is that,
But the
I'm sorry,
premise-
are you
the
putting
premise-
words into, are you typing words into a post that I made?
No, I'm not. I
Okay,
don't
so the
follow your
post
social
is still
media.
there,
People send it to me.
Councilmember Duffy, and I would suggest you go back and read it before you change it to say it's something that it did not say.
Fine, but
Okay.
the point is the
Then we can,
respect piece, the civility piece.
screenshot the post.
And
What
that's
about the
thing.
civility piece, when you sit up here and you say you actually twist what I said when it's in writing right there and it wasn't a slam on you. So where's the civility there? Where's the civility when you attack a
I
citizen
didn't attack
who's
a
up? You
citizen.
did.
Yeah,
And the
you did.
mayor wouldn't even
Yes,
stop
you
it.
did.
She has slandered me in public.
They
to
do-
my friends.
Hey, we're up
So
here.
it's-
We're up here and we take it, right?
Here's the
No,
thing.
we're up here and we take it, right?
A 10-minute recess until
Right.
10 o'clock.
2 years of my life.
Park City Council's reconvene. We're on item H8, rules of procedure. My thoughts would be,
All right. What just happened there? Seriously, what did you just see just happen there? Throw out some things that you saw. What's that? They lost control of the meeting. What's that? The boxing gloves. The boxing. There's no boxing gloves. What else?
Facebook drama.
What's that?
Facebook drama.
Facebook drama. So they were talking about each other on social media, weren't they? Outside of the council chambers, weren't they? What else? What's that? You're in the right place. We hope.
They're just talking over each other.
Talking over, they're not listening to each other, are they? They're really talking at each other. They're talking to, quite honestly, is they're talking to the TV camera, right? They're trying to make that sort of bullshit. What I also thought was interesting was you saw that piece where they said, and the mayor won't even do anything about it, right? I sense that there's maybe some history between that guy and the mayor, right? They maybe had it for each other a little bit. Yeah, one last one.
Say it sounded like a kind of a long simmering
Yeah.
relationship.
Yep.
Or lack of relationship.
Exactly. And so what does that say about Cedar Point or whatever, Cedar Park, Texas, right? What kind of community is that? How do they do their work? How do they treat each other, right? Whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, your city has a culture. It's got a brand, and it's on display every single week when you all meet, right? What we're going to try and do here is we're going to talk about the core pieces of that culture, how you create it, and then how a mechanism that we have used to begin creating systemic cultural engagement and norms and standards, right? So you're going to hear us talk about all of those pieces. So how many of you, so I'm just curious, I want to get a show of hands, and leave your hand up, right? So if any of these apply. How many of you have had fights like this or arguments that have sort of boiled over in your council meetings? Now, some people would say if you haven't, then you're not trying hard enough. But I don't believe that. I don't believe that to be true. Okay. How many of you have had folks, the public, keep your hands up if you've had it. How many of you have had the public show up at your meetings, pissed off and yelling and screaming? Okay. How How often, okay, especially for mayors, any mayors in here, how often does your city manager, no, okay, everybody who's raised your hand, yeah, I know, just keep them up there. How many
aerobic
of you
exercise.
mayors have had your city manager come to you and say, hey, council member X is directing the Public Works Department to do X, Y, or Z, I need you to talk to them, right? Yeah, because mayors, you're the fixer, right? You got to fix all this stuff. Then, last question. How many, I'm sure all of you invest in professional development for your staff, okay? And this is for electeds. How many of you are spending money on your own professional development as a high-functioning team of elected officials? Keep your hand up. If you're not doing that, drop your hand. All right, the 6 of you can be excused from class. The rest of you, I'm here to tell you right now, you spend a lot of money on your staff to make sure that they are delivering the services your residents expect, and you need to be investing money and time in your own professional development and your work as a team. So, what is the one thing that is most important? Oh, Tom, can you take us out of the... Nope, go around here. I think we just go.
It didn't.
There we go. Okay. Let me see if that, there we go. Okay. What's the one thing? Culture. Culture eats policy for lunch. We hear that all the time. You hire for attitude, you train for skills, right? That's about culture. That's about this person, the employee that you're talking about. What are their values? What's their work ethic? You can teach them how to do the things that they need to do, but you can't teach them to have the right attitude. Culture is also about the values and norms that an organization uses, right? So for those of you who are in Newport, right, by the way, this is my second trip out here to Oregon. I spoke at the Oregon Mayors Association. And some of the things we're talking about today were sort of highlighted in my remarks there. But you know, for mayors, and how many mayors are in the room? Got it? Okay. We don't really, most of you, like most of the folks in Minnesota, we're a council manager form of government, right? And as mayor in the charter, I don't have a lot more authority than my council colleagues, right? Like you, I chair meetings, I sign official documents, and I declare emergencies when that's necessary. Everything else that I do comes from the culture and the norms of our organization, and they are an intentional and deliberate process that we go through and revisit every single year. So for example, I am the spokesperson for my city. That's not always a given, right? There are people, and we have had situations where council members have decided, nope, I want to go talk to the press. I want to give them my opinion. And I will tell you, probably one of the biggest debacles we had in our community was what sort of blew up because we had everybody wanting to talk to the press, right? And it took us many, many weeks and 3 days of Donald Trump tweeting about our city to sort of get that thing straightened out, right? So if you want to go through that, just find yourself a good therapist before you do, because you'll need it. And then, the last thing I would say about culture, just at least at the top of this, is it is not an overnight thing. This is not, you're not going to walk out of here with oh, here we go. I'm going to just drop this off on the city manager's desk on Monday and we're going to be good to go. It takes time. We have a really, really good culture in our community. It doesn't mean we're always agreement. It doesn't mean we don't argue. It doesn't mean we don't disagree, all that. But we have a really good agreed upon set of language and rules by which we can resolve those sorts of disagreements. That was not always the case here in St. Louis Park, I should say. And it took time. And so we'll talk a little bit about that too. So go ahead, Tom.
One of the things I just wanted to underscore that the mayor said earlier in his remarks is, and this is maybe focused more towards the CAOs in the room, is hiring for attitude, understanding you can always treat or teach skills. I've learned that the hard way. Some time ago, I hired just an outstanding CFO from a technical perspective, extremely bright, but everybody hated working with him. And he did not fit into our cultural norms. And eventually, and it's very difficult to discipline around that, but eventually that person had to leave. So hiring for attitude and hiring a person that understands the cultural norms and behaviors expected comes first. Again, you can always teach skills or tweak skills that they might have. So thank you, Mayor.
And before Tom gets into the ingredients piece, I just want to highlight one item. The norms and culture of an organization is not code for if you're not like us, you're not welcome.
Right.
Right? So what you're hearing from us comes from two middle-class white guys. If you are a black person or a brown person or Native American, the way you interact with each other, the way you interact with them, what they bring to the table, right, is really, really valuable and important. And we've got a process for working through all of that, right, as new people come in. But I especially want to sort of note that it's easy for me to stand up here and talk about a lot of the things that we're going to talk about around vulnerability and norm creation and all of that and being honest and transparent. It's much harder for folks who do not look like me to do that, right? And so for most of us in this room, we just need to be aware of that going into it. So I just want to kind of name that piece. So,
Thank you, Mayor.
Sorry.
So this Venn diagram is intended to kind of underscore the three key ingredients in our cookbook that have evolved over time that has helped create a culture on the council and within staff and in the community that is a healthy one. You'll notice governance, self-awareness, and relationships, and we're going to talk about all three of those today. But the sweet spot is culture. By focusing on those three areas, it provides for a culture that puts your city in the best position to be successful and high performing. Getting to this did not happen overnight. I've been with the city of St. Louis Park for 26 years, 9 years as community development director, and 17. Does that add up right? Yeah. 17 as city manager. I'm just a city manager. And when I first got there, things were a little tough. And with some changes on the council and based on some suggestions made by the city manager and some first steps that were taken, and Jake's going to probably touch on that a little bit later, we have evolved over time to focusing on these three areas to ensure that healthy culture exists. This works for St. Louis Park. These three ingredients may not be right for your community. I think the idea is identify what those are, and if it works, if it leads to that sweet spot, as I just mentioned earlier, that's all that matters, right? It doesn't have to be this way. We're just trying to describe to you that we've been very intentional and mindful about how we do our business that has resulted, I think, into an organization and a community that's been very, very successful.
All right, I'm going to talk about the first one. How many of you know what your governance model is? Yeah? Go ahead, get them up there if you know. All right, so now here's the part where I'm going to start calling on people. What's your governance model? Nope.
It's part of it.
Well,
it's part of it.
The charter is the legal rules, right? I'm talking about something that's maybe it's a little bit broader than that, not quite the specific. Yeah, Greg. So that's your form of government, right? A little bit different. One more try. Anyone else? Go ahead. What? How do you make decisions? What is your governance model?
It's cooperative.
Okay. Okay. So in St. Louis Park, we use something called the Carver governance model. It's authored by a guy by the name of John Carver. And it's pretty simple. He uses the analogy of bowls, right? Big bowls and small bowls. Big bowls is the highest policy, right, you could imagine, and small bowls is the smallest, right? So like biggest bowl might be, what is the highest and best use of this piece of land? Smallest bowl might be, what's the color of the walls? in the living rooms of the apartment building that's going to be like, what does this thing look like, right? I use it a little bit differently. I talk about it a little differently. I talk about ownership groups, and I talk about above the line, below the line, and Tom and I have talked about this before. So I want you to imagine a piece of paper with a horizontal line across the middle of it. Everything that is above that, that is what and why. That is council. That is policymakers, right? What we are doing and why do we do it. That's the council. Below that line is how. That's staff. That's your city manager. That's all of the team that implements that, right? Council needs to stay above the line. Staff needs to stay below the line, and you can do that line however you want. You could do it as a vertical line and left, right, but it's about making sure that you understand what is my role in this organization, okay? And yes, the charter lays out certainly the powers and duties, right? But this is more about making sure that everybody kind of understands what's their space, right? And I would also add that lately, when I talk about it in terms of another analogy that is pretty easy for people to understand, sometimes I'll talk about a publicly traded company, right? You have employees, that's your staff, right? They do the thing, they make the product, okay? Then you've got, and you've got a CEO, right? That's your city manager, the chief executive officer. Then you've got a board of directors, right? They're setting the long-term vision for the organization, the company. What markets are we going to go to? What products do we want to develop, right? What segments of the market do we want to be in? That's council, right? Now, I would also argue that you probably could take another line and draw it above the council. Who's the ownership group of this organization? It's your residents, that's right. They're the shareholders, right? And those are the people that we answer to. And for staff, one of the things that I think is important when you're digging into your own culture as an organization is remember, Tom's heard us, we say this all the time, an unbelievable level of respect for the staff that work at my city. I don't answer to them. I answer to the residents. That's who I'm there to represent. Now, that does not mean that I am adversarial or difficult or a pain in the ass or anything like. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is I have a responsibility. I have been asked by my neighbors to do something for them, and I have to take that duty very, very seriously. I think the last thing I would say about that governance piece, right, and especially about above the line, below the line. The only times that, the few times I should say that you see real difficulties is when you get intense crossover. Now, I will say, I think it's okay periodically for staff to go above the line and make policy suggestions. Council, based on what we're seeing in the Parks Department, we think we need to make a change of course correction on this or, whatever, right? More often than not, where it gets bad is when us electeds decide that we want to decide whether you're using hot pack or cold pack in September to fix the potholes. I mean, that's not your job, right? It is your job to say, hey, we are not doing a good enough job with potholes. Like I keep hearing that we keep refilling them, they keep breaking, can engineering or public works, you guys need to look into this. We've got a problem, right? So it's okay to step over, but it's important to name it when you do it. And if you ever watch some of our council meetings, you will frequently see one of us say, I know I'm getting a little small bowl here, but, so we're gonna put that forward and then we're gonna step back, right? Because we wanna acknowledge that it's not our job to do this or fix this or deal with this, but we just wanna flag it. And I guarantee you for all of the staff, for you electeds, all of your staff back at home, they live in dread of you coming home after this session. Because you've just heard all of these great ideas that you think you should implement in that city right now. Tom always gets a giggle because I would come back from the National League of Cities conference, I'd be like, here are the 5 things that we should be doing. And he's just like, you know what, dude? I got it. We're good. But thank you, but and it is our job to bring back ideas and suggestions, but it's staff's job to implement those decisions that we make. And so just, again, knowing above the line, below the line, and respecting the fact that both of us have jobs in those spaces and naming when we're outside of those spaces and doing it in a respectful way is really important. So.
Thank you, Mayor. The second ingredient in the Venn diagram is relationships. And I think, or I hope, we can all agree that really healthy relationships are important, whether it be in your personal life or your professional life. city employee or as an elected official. The pillars, as we like to call them, is based on those 4 items on the screen, which for me, I feel trust is the most important, the most imperative. I've said this to my staff, I've said this to the council. If you don't trust us, we're done. We won't get things done. I have worked in a city, I was not the city manager, where the council did not trust the city manager. And it was quicksand. We could not get anything done. So trust to me is the imperative. It takes a long time to build, and it can be gone in a flash, right? Just like that, it can be gone. From an internal perspective, in terms of building trust, one of the things that we've spent a lot of time and resources on is what we call relational learning, right? It's about understanding yourself, who you are, and Jake's going to talk about that a little bit more, and understanding those that you're working with, what makes them tick. And some tools that we've used, and maybe some of your cities have used them to get to relational learning, are things like, it's a tool called the Gregoric. I don't think it's supported anymore, but we used it. It's a personality inventory. Another is True Colors. Has anybody in this room used the True Colors back there? Again, it's a...
How many of you have used that? Okay. Did any of you ever use the Gregoric? I'm just curious. As he's naming these, I'd be curious to see how many of you have used them.
So, and when we use those instruments, it's not, you understand your personality style, what makes you tick, how you think, how you learn. We share that information with one another so that in the case of Jake and myself, we are exact opposites in terms of our personality style, how we learn, how we think. He's a concrete random, I'm a concrete sequential. He just gets to the same place I'm going to get in a different way. It drives me crazy, but once I understand that's how he thinks, it helps with addressing conflict, which gets to my next suggestion that we've used. It's called the Thomas Kilman Conflict Mode Instrument. Basically, it helps you identify and it helps others understand how you deal with conflict. We've had council members who are extremely direct and others that are not. And there are various shades in between. But understanding how you deal with conflict is really critical, and it's important for staff as well as they work with one another. Honesty and open communication, again, is essential to building trust. I've told my staff this many times, just tell me when something doesn't go right. Don't make up stories, don't make up excuses, just tell me, yeah, we really screwed up on that. That's the trust builder for me, right? I'm trusting they're telling me what's going on. Likewise with the city council. I don't like doing it, but there's been many times where I've said to the council, yeah, we screwed up on that. Maybe we impounded some cars we shouldn't have. Remember that, Jake? Mm-hmm. We ended up reimbursing those people for the cost of the tow.
I tried forgetting it until you just brought it up.
We screwed up. We made a big mistake. We screwed up. I can't speak enough about the importance of honesty and really clear communication. I spend a lot of time, I've learned a long time ago, clear communication with the council builds that trust. Council members like to know what's going on, right? They don't want to read about it in the paper or hear about it from their neighbors. So that communication is key. And it also holds true for your community. If you don't have the trust of your community, why would they vote for a bond referendum? Why would they support a certain significant initiative in the community? If you can't do the small things well, why would they expect that you're going to do the big things really well? So building that trust in the community takes a long, long time, and we've used a variety of different approaches to building that. But what it comes down to is communication, consistent communication, some really strong and intentional public processes around things that are going on in the community, visioning initiatives, which have been incredibly powerful, And I think something we can never forget about is intentional outreach to the not the usual suspects. And I think you know who I'm talking about, right? There's a core group in the community that, at least from my experience, and Jake's, I hear from all the time, right? All the time. I understand what their needs and concerns are, but there are a lot of other people in the community that I don't know or I don't hear from, and it's really important that you figure out a way to reach those people as well.
So I want to just reflect on a couple things that Tom brought up. When I first started on the council, right, was like a lot of people. Scott, you and I talked about this. Like we kind of, you come in and you think, yeah, I don't know if you've met me, but I'm kind of a big deal, right? I've been elected and I got things to do, so y'all just sort of, look out. And I spent my first year on the council, well, I was going to say pulling my hair out, but that doesn't apply. But I think you get the point. and it was happening in particular with one or two of my colleagues. Like Monday night council meetings were becoming an absolute, like, I really loathed them. And it was largely because I had one colleague who insisted at every council meeting, when you would start talking about something, she would go, well, first off, I'd like to point out some typos that are in the ordinance, and I'd like the city manager to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she would start, like, literally line item redlining this document. And I thought to myself, like, I'm going to governance, right? I'm like, what in the world are you doing? But the reality was, after my first year, we did a retreat where we used the Gregoric, this model, right? And what I realized was that this person this is the way she ordered information. She was a concrete sequential. She needed lists, right? She needed clarity. She needed exactitude. She was an attorney, right? Versus me as a concrete random, right? When we have a policy discussion, I can jump into the policy solution, then I can go back to the history of the issue, then I can start talking about the budget implications moving forward, then I can start talking, let's come back, what about community outreach? I have no problem moving around in that way, right? She could not do that. And it's not that one was right or wrong. It was that the moment I realized she's not being a pain, it's just the way she orders information, was probably, maybe singularly, the best moment of all of my time on council in terms of my ability to navigate and spend Monday nights with a group of people. Because I now was like, oh, I get it. She's not doing it to be difficult. This is just how she operates. And so doing that work and learning that about your colleagues is really, really important. So I want to talk a little bit about one of the things that I think is really important, and it is being self-aware about who you are, about what your role is, right? And it's very tied to the relational learning stuff that I just mentioned and Tom was talking about. So I'm going to share a story with you. And this is going to sound silly. This is going to sound like the most sort of like Rockwellian, nerdy, civic thing that you might have heard in a while. But it's about me failing to uphold the norms and expectations of the council and of my own, right? So about two or 3 months ago, we're having a policy discussion. One of my colleagues and I are on the opposite side of this discussion. And he spends about 15 minutes going through all of his points and making his arguments, and I listen to them. And it's not important, but as mayor, like, I feel like these folks have election certificates, and I know a lot of mayors were like, 15 minutes? I'm like, what are you got 7 people on your council, you're gonna be there till 11:30 at night, Yeah, but you know what? They earned this. They get the opportunity to express themselves. So I listened and I made a couple of quick notes and what have you, and kind of went around the table. Then it came to me, and I spoke. And I got about 30 or 45 seconds into my remarks, and his head dropped down, and he started on the keyboard, right? I kept going for another 60 seconds or so, and I sort of was waiting, and all of a sudden, like, he's still, so I just stopped. 30, 45 seconds later, he's like, he looks around, and I got lasers, man. They are burning a hole in his forehead so fast, right? And I said, did I lose you? I sat here and listened to you for 20 minutes, Larry. I spoke for 30 seconds, and it doesn't feel to me like you're listening to me. So if you're not too busy, I'd appreciate it if you would give me your undivided attention, just like everyone else, like that, right? Which, by the way, for those of you who are not familiar with the Upper Midwest, that's what passes for blind white rage, right? That is just sheer sort of slash and burn, that's what rage looks like in that land. And I then proceeded to sort of do, he stopped and I did my thing. And instantly when I did it, I was just like, I shouldn't have done that. He didn't deserve that. And it wasn't really about him. It was about me not feeling respected, right? So before the next council meeting comes up, I said, Larry, I pulled him aside and I said, Larry, I want to apologize to you for what happened last week. I violated one of the norms of our council. And by the way, when we get together every year and we talk about our governance structure and our models, which we'll talk about here in a second, we have a whole series of norms that we write down. These are the sort of gray area unwritten rules. That thing about the mayor being a spokesperson, that's a norm. It's not prescribed in our charter, right? That's an agreement that we have as a group. And one of the norms that we have is that we focus on policy, we don't make it personal. I made it personal. I failed, I apologize, and I want you to know that tonight, when we're on TV, I'm going to talk about it. You don't have to, but I'm going to name it, right? I want to do that. And he's like, yeah, thank you, I appreciate that. I couldn't figure out kind of where that came from, and I was sort of curious afterwards, like, what prompted that? Why were you so? I said, well, do you want to know? He's like, yeah. I said, you violated one of our norms, right? One of our norms is like, we listen to understand one another. I said, it felt to me like you weren't listening to me to understand me. It felt like you were writing everything I was saying down so that you could refute it, because like I said, we were on the opposite side of this, right? And Larry sort of paused for a second and he said, yeah, you know what, you're right. I wasn't listening to you. I was just typing what you were saying because I wanted to go through line by line and I wanted to make sure I answered every one of your observations with a counter observation. And I said, he goes, I apologize, I shouldn't have done that. And I said, you know what, that's cool, I appreciate that, thank you, And we sort of hugged it out right there, and I said, you don't have to talk about it, but I just want you to know. Well, of course, we get to open communication at the end of the night. I said, for those of you who were watching our meeting on TV last night, you probably noticed I lost my temper with Councilmember Kraft. I wanted everybody to know. I've apologized to him privately. He's accepted my apology. I want to apologize to everyone here publicly, my colleagues publicly, but more importantly to my residents. You deserve better from me than you got that night, and I'm pledging to try and do better. I'm not making a promise I'm going to be better, but I'm going to do my best, right? And then Larry said, in defense of the mayor, he got upset with me because I wasn't modeling our norms either. I wasn't really listening to him, and so that I sort of started it a little bit, so I apologize as well, right? Now, why do I tell this story? It's not about like two guys hugging it out kind of thing, but I really do firmly believe that it's two things. One, it is an exercise in humility. For those of you who are elected officials, this ain't about you. I am not the mayor. I'm the person who has the baton right now in the relay race. I got it from somebody and I'll give it to somebody. In the meantime, my job is to do the best that I can. And I think that the moment you sort of understand that and embrace that humility, I think the moment that you understand and embrace that, you're going to be a lot better off because you won't take all of the things that happen in your city quite as personally, for one. More importantly, though, I believe when our residents see two civic nerds nerding it out there, they likely feel to themselves like, you know what, we don't need to be checking their math every week. They're calling each other out on the carpet over these little things, but in a healthy way, I probably don't need to show up at city council meetings and demand this and demand that transparency, because look at them. I mean, look at what they're sort of modeling for the rest of us, which is two people can totally disagree about something, right, and still work together. And as mayors, this is your number one job. And I've said this to a few of you. My number one job, I believe, as mayor, because we, staff and elected officials, are the keepers of the culture of our community. But for me as a mayor, my number one job is to create an environment where 7 people who come from different walks of life can get together every Monday night, argue passionately about things that are really important to them, arrive at a decision, give staff direction, and support the implementation of something that they may not have supported as a policy concept at all. And then come back the next Monday and do it all over again. And again, and again, and again, right? That's not magic. You can't get this at Target. It's not on a buy one, get one. It's work. But I believe that as a mayor, that's really where my job is most important, is to try and create that space where folks can disagree in a healthy way, in a productive way, and in a respectful way, and yes, in a passionate way sometimes, right? I'm not discounting that, right? But that's for us as mayors in particular. That is what I think is one of our biggest and most important jobs. So I wanted to sort of share that with all of you, because it's, I think, a good story and a good example of what we try to aspire to, which is not perfection, but honest and open and transparent accountability and vulnerability, and being okay with that. So,
Am I on, Brad? Again, just a reminder about the dynamics of what Jake was talking about. Again, in the end, they understood that they wanted to increase the value of the shareholders' assets, right? They wanted to make sure they were providing the best governance to the stakeholders in the community, the residents, the shareholders. It wasn't about them. You're there, in this case, as a group of 7 people that individually you really have no power. Your power comes as a part of the whole. So if you make it about yourself, you're not serving the best interests of the community. And that, I think, is something the council understands extremely well, and it's something that we talk about all the time. Thank you, Mayor.
yep. All right, and we're nearing the end of our presentation. I promise we're running over. So the last thing that we want to talk about is, okay, we got all these Legos, right? Culture and norms and values, and now just what do we do with it? How do we make that work, right? You need an instruction manual. And this is really where the retreat concept comes in, right? How many of you do a retreat every year as a council? I'm surprised. I would have thought more. Okay, now here's my next question. For those of you who raised your hand, I'm not talking about a retreat that's focused on, like, here are the things that we're going to work on this coming year, right? I'm not talking about issues. I'm not talking about what you're going to work on. I'm talking about how many of you spend time working on this stuff, your governance model, your norms, right? All of that stuff. Okay, so like 5 or 6, half a dozen of you. Okay. So it didn't start off this way. It started off very initially as a conversation about our governance model. How do we make decisions as a body? And this goes back to one of, person who served on the council late 90s, right? And he just asked the question, like, hey, can we sit down and talk about, like, how our governance model, like how we make decisions and what's our job and all the rest of it. It has evolved into what are really the 2 most important days that we spend every single year. More important than passing a budget, more important than setting levy limits and kind of what your tax levy is going to be, all that. More important than hiring is these 2 days that we spend as senior staff and council working on our norms, governance, and relational learning work. So we spend 2 days, and we sort of segregate it into 4 buckets, right? Our governance is usually the first thing that we talk about, the norms, and We revisit our list of norms every year because every single year the council is different. And it's an agreed upon thing. And we've added things to our norms and we've taken stuff out, right? One of the norms, for example, that's changed just recently is, and some people may get heartburn about this, but we would go out socially after council meetings to have a drink. Never talking about city business, and in Minnesota state statute, there's a provision that says you can meet socially as long as you're not doing business, right? We now have a Muslim member on our council, and while she's okay being around people who drink, it's not her favorite thing in the world to do, right? So we've sort of stepped back from that, and now we're introducing this notion of having dinners before council meetings as a way to create connection. But we spend these 2 days working on our norms and our governance, on relational learning, and then a specific area that covers the entire city. And by that, I don't mean a specific part of your city work. I mean, we might spend part of our time talking about our race equity work, right? We might sit down and talk about, perhaps we're going to do one of our visioning, every 10 years we do a big visioning project. Maybe we would sit down and talk about that visioning project, right? But that's sort of the way that we break it down. There are some basic do's and don'ts, right? So one of the things we do now is me and a council member and 2 staff members solicit input from staff and from my colleagues about what should we talk about in that 4th bucket, right? What might we want to dig in there? Or do we feel that one of those other 3 we really need to dig into because maybe somebody violated norms a lot that year and we really need to spend some time digging into that, right? But we'll come to an agreement based on the feedback we get about what we're going to cover. That doesn't mean that everyone agrees, but it means the majority of the council's in agreement of what we're going to cover. Do not leave town to do one of these, okay? I mean, there are people who have lost their seats because they did a retreat. They went to a hotel in another city to do this retreat. You do it in your community, at a fire station. Don't do it at City Hall, right? There's a dynamic in City Hall, right? Go someplace else. Go to a fire station. Go to a AAA we went to one time. There's lots of places, the nonprofit organizations in your community that would be happy to host you, right? Food needs to be a part of it, for both the timing piece, right, and maximizing the amount of time you've got, but also I believe very strongly there is something very spiritual and very important about breaking bread with another person. When you eat with them, there is something that's different about that time, right? So we always have food be a part of it. Again, it needs to be publicly accessible. One of the very common questions I get is, wait a minute, you're all in the same room together. That means this is a public meeting. Yep, it is, and we advise it as a public meeting. And I can absolutely tell you that in the time that I've been on the council, we have had a reporter show up once, and that was in the fallout of that other issue that I told you about that the president was tweeting about. That's the only time that we've ever had a member of the press or public come. And it's not because they don't think it's interesting, but it's part of our culture, and they've come to expect, we know what's going on there. That's they're getting together and figuring out their rules for the year. And then the last thing that I would say is, I don't know that there's a right or wrong, because I know there's also a session, Tom noticed there was a session here earlier about whether you should hire people to do retreats and facilitate work. I'm not going to tell you that there's one that's right or wrong. We've done both, where we've had internal staff lead and facilitate the retreat. We also bring in external staff sometimes to lead and facilitate the retreat as a whole, but certainly almost always we bring in subject matter experts in certain areas to really dig deeply. We might bring in somebody who's an expert in governance, right, to talk to us about that if we want to. So, and in closing, what I'll say is normalizing this as part of your work and part of the regular calendar and cadence of what you do as a city, right? Getting into this habit and making it just a part of, there's budget season, there's tax season, there's city assessment season, there's that season, that time of year when we get together and do this work. And we try to do it as soon after the new members are seated. And I would say that the culture of inclusion around this, thanks to Tom, actually sort of precedes someone actually even getting on the council, right? And so this notion that we are inclusive of people who are going to be at the table, and the way, for example, Tom and his team led sessions where if you had any interest in running for city office, he'd get his city department heads together for a night and do just roundtable. Like, here's what engineering does. Here's what PD does. Here's what you should know what the heck you're doing if you want to be in this, right? And then once you have an election, and we know who's won, the results have been canvassed, and we know who's going to be seated, unless there's a legal reason that I can't include someone on communication from staff or other that sitting council member, they start getting CC'd on that email, right? So when a restaurant owner reaches out to me and says, hey, I got a problem, was there something going on, right? And maybe Greg Evans would be the ward council member, right, for that area. I might say, Councilmember Evans, I'm including Tom Harmoning, who will be, taking over in January. Like, Tom, this is Greg, here's the issue, this restaurant owner, et cetera, so that when they take their seat, they're ready to go, because it takes a lot to learn those things. So I just think there's a lot of things that you can do to create a culture on your council and with your senior leadership that promotes inclusion and it promotes high-functioning, performing teams, because you have a business case to make to your residents. When Tom, and I'll turn it over to Tom. I want Tom to talk about hiring people and why this is important for hiring staff too. So there you go.
Well, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, if this is what you're driving at, Mayor, and that is making sure you're hiring staff that understand and can embrace the culture that has grown and developed in your organization. We name and claimed it. Our 3 cultural behaviors expected of staff were responsiveness, collaboration, and quality. And we tied that into our performance evaluations and a whole host of means to drive home. Those are the 3 cultural behaviors that you're expected to be comfortable with. And if you're not, then maybe you need to leave. From a CAO perspective, like the mayor, culture, I think, is the number one thing you need to pay attention to, because it drives everything else in your organization. It drives how things get done. And if it's not healthy, you won't get a good result. The other thing I would say about retreats is, Jake is absolutely right. Those are the 2 most important days of the year, but it's not a 2 and done either. There's always follow-up, and you need to be intentional about that and just kind of not blow it off. So if let's, for example, say, we need to do more work on this race equity thing or on our environmental initiatives or what have you, but we just ran out of time, then you need to be intentional about setting up time subsequently to make sure that you do the work that you started at that particular retreat.
So that is it. The rest of the time, which we apologize is shorter than we thought it was going to be, is for questions. If folks have questions, and certainly Tom and I will be here afterwards, but questions from the group. Yep, Greg. All right, I'll repeat your question.
I'm loud enough. So we just went through this on my council about a month. Yeah, we went through this about a month ago on my council, and it was kind of late in the year. And what we had was a session to craft a mission statement. And I kind of balked at that because I said, what we really need to do is have a visioning process, because we haven't had a visioning process for the city for a long time. I think it's important that you have a vision that you set out, and then you can build mission statements, sets of values that you say this is what we are as a city. But sometimes when you hire outside consultants, they don't understand what you really need. And I have a tough time trying to go between what I can get from staff internally versus having someone who comes in from the outside to help us craft a quote-unquote statement. In my opinion, we can do statements all day long, but what we really need to do is periodically have a visioning process every 5 or 6 or 10 years so that we know where we want the city to go. When I was teaching, several years ago, community college level, I would always have an exercise with my students, and I'd say, look, give me a picture, a snapshot of what you want your life to look like in 15 years. Put whatever you need in there, a house, a car, a girlfriend, a husband, a wife, 5 dogs, whatever the case may be. But tell me what you think your life should look like at that time. And I think that's something that we all need to do with our cities, is say, what does this city going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years, and then how do we get there?
Others? Really? Yeah. Questions?
It's not really, well, it's kind of a question for you guys, a situational thing. You're talking about trust working between council and staff. How do you include in that the citizenry? Because in my case, I'm losing trust of the residents with the staff. They trust the council, but they don't trust the staff.
So here's what I'd say about that. From an elected perspective, that's my response. I need to own that, right? And what I frequently find is that when I'm vulnerable, like when I sort of open myself up and say, yep, you know what, we can do better, right? Public doesn't want to usually, they don't, I mean, that's not to say that this is uniform, right? That we all know that there are people in our community that want to take shots, but they don't usually really want to inflict pain. They just want the problem fixed. So one of the things that we always talk about is praising publicly, criticizing privately, right? And so I think it's important that the public sees us saying, that doesn't mean that you don't have criticisms, right, and suggestions, but I think seeing your elected officials say, staff, you've done a great job with this, or when they have disagreements to say, you know what, I think we can do better here. I appreciate all the effort that's gone in so far, right? And then I think what you then have to do, though, in your particular situation is you got to kind of drill into what's at the root of that, right. And then you're going to have to turn that over. Because what I tell people all the time is, if you want to be mad that we're doing something, be mad at me. If you want to be mad about the way it's getting done, I need to get you to the guy or gal who actually runs that, and that's the city manager, right?
I would agree completely. I've had that situation a number of times, sometimes directly from a resident saying, your engineer isn't being truthful about this street project, and I'm not trusting staff. And, you know, the first thing you need to do is you know, seek first to understand, right? So give me more information, help me understand. And if it's in some cases, a situation where maybe the staff was disrespectful to the person and they feel like they haven't been heard, that is something that, as the leader of the organization, the city manager or department head, needs to deal with that individual. If it's a disagreement about the policy that staff person is trying to carry out, that's very different. You can't blame the staff for following the policy that the council's asked them to follow. And then you use a different approach. Then you can say, well, maybe talk to your ward council member if you have that, or the mayor, and that policy can be revisited if the council feels it should be. So it kind of depends, but I think, as the mayor said, seek first to understand, you know, affirm their concern, and go from there. So
the only other thing I would add to that is, and Tom and I kind of butted heads a little bit about this a while ago. Came out, I think, good in the end. We had some folks who also did not trust the information they were getting from us. They believed that we were withholding information about groundwater contamination, around drinking water, right? And what I advocated for, you know, we'd always put out information. We'd always been very transparent. You know, we weren't hiding anything, right? But we weren't kind of going that little bit of extra step. And so I sort of nudged Tom to say, like, Tom,
the two women that are running this organization, bring them in, okay? Like, let's stop saying like, oh, we want to make sure you saw this, you know. Let's actually like let them know when a press release is coming out before it comes out. Let's make them a part of this and be totally open about the information. The reason I bring it up is because that group was super active on social media and blowtorching the city every chance they got. But through Tom and our communications department and their work, that group has largely sort of, I won't say they're our defenders, but I will say when somebody in the group sort of steps forward and says, you know, oh, did you hear this terrible thing that happened? Or did you hear about it? One of those two will frequently step forward and say, well, no, actually, remember, that was in that email blast I sent out 2 weeks ago. The city told us about that 2 weeks ago. Oh, okay, all right, well, okay, all right, you know. So I think being as open as you possibly can is important as well. Maybe one more, I don't know, it's 1:30, so I'll go till the battery runs out, but I want to go to somebody who hasn't, go ahead, you had your hand up a little bit ago.
Well, yeah, I was kind of, you guys touched a little bit on it, but I was just going to say that, you know, in defense of the staff, they really do enact the policy that we set forth, right? So if you're hearing that citizens are unhappy with the staff, that means that we've done something wrong in our policy setting. Because they are bringing to life the policy that we set. Now, obviously, there's times when citizens are going to be upset about something because it just didn't go their way.
Right.
You know, and it doesn't mean we need to change policy, but I think for the most part, when that happens, when they say they're losing trust in staff, that essentially means they're losing trust in elections as well, because we're setting the policy that the staff is following.
And I think, again, there's the what and there's the how. And I always try and divide those two things. Like, are you upset about the fact that staff's not supposed to be working past 7 o'clock on this road project and they're still working at 8 o'clock? Okay, I'll get you to Tom and we'll make sure that doesn't happen because we set those parameters, right? If you're mad that we're doing that road improvement project, you know, and the phrase I'll just close with to this because I think it speaks to both of you is, the people in this room, you all sit at the nexus of something that's really, really important, which is you are trying to balance being responsive and responsible. And this is like, everybody owes Tom a quarter if they ever use that again, because I think Tom was the originator of it. But by that I mean, we are trying to be responsive to that resident who is upset about the fact that maybe their landscaping is being torn up because we're putting a roundabout near their house, with the fact that our community has said we need better transportation nodes to get around in our community, right? We're trying to balance responsive to your needs, but responsible to the 50,000 people in our city who want something done. And when I tell people that in an email, you know, when they're upset with me, and I usually, hey, thank you, we're trying to balance responsive, responsible. And by the way, I know, Sam, this isn't the answer you wanted to hear, but I hope with my explanation you understand how we got there. And I'll absolutely follow up on your concerns around how late our team is working. And thank you for that, right? And that almost always gets me a response that says, thank you for affirming that I'm pissed off and that I'm not crazy for being upset, right? You're not sort of brushing me off, and I appreciate it. So that's, anyhow, thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you, Mayor Spano and Mr. Harming, for that amazing presentation. It was very incisive to me personally. But up next, there is ice cream and donuts out in the lobby, and sponsored by Pacific Power. So thank you for joining us this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of the day here at the 97th League of Oregon City Annual Conference.